Hi, I'm Mike Carruthers, and today I'm going to share a testimonial of my Christian journey, my faith story. Probably the biggest influence, one of the big influences in my finding my faith would be my father, Terry. Terry was, who's deceased now, was a member of the Pentecostal church and a very committed born-again Christian. My father Terry was a traveling salesman. His sales territory encompassed Greater Vancouver, where we lived, and then west of Vancouver Island, north in the interior of BC, and then west across the prairies all the way to Winnipeg. Today, when I sometimes visit a second-hand store, and I will encounter perhaps the art glassware or the exquisite stemware or monkey pod salad bowls, some of the things that Dad sold as a giftware salesman. And he also sold wholesale jewelry, kind of following along the line of my grandfather, his father, who had a wholesale jewelry business in Vancouver. My dad was a traveler. He was after the war, there was a great demand for consumer products across the prairies, and Dad was happy to go to visit the retailers to provide this new product. And I'm sure there were many brides across Western Canada who put on their rings an engagement ring or a wedding band that had originated with my father. And I'm certainly proud of him. It was certainly a thing he loved to do, and he had friends across Western Canada. I certainly encountered this when I got a little bit older and met him on a couple of trips. I remember one trip I met him for the first time in Manitoba, and he traveled from town to town with me for a few days. And he come into a town, and his customers were indeed his friends, and they were catching up or would they go to the pub together and have a beer. And there were a lot of friends my dad had across the prairies, across Western Canada. Well, with Dad being away a minimum of 6 months of a year, it was probably not. It was not surprising now in retrospect that my parents divorced when I was 10. Dad just wasn't home that much, and it must have been very difficult for my mother. So what was even more surprising was when Dad came home after the first trip after he was divorced with a new wife, Doreen, who we had no idea he was seeing her. So it was quite a change in our lives. And, he remarried us. Well, my mother remarried quite quickly after the divorce. So to go back to my story, so after they split up, my parents were really good in terms of being civil with each other and allowing access to us as kids. We would go when my dad was home on Saturdays to visit him at his house and visit him primarily. I remember visiting him with him and Doreen and being felt very welcome and loved. I do remember as I approached puberty that he always had a lazy boy chair, and sitting prominently in that lazy boy chair would be a Playboy magazine and a bottle of 5-Star rye whiskey, which my father enjoyed, and I even collected for a while of 5-Star plastic logos that were attached to each bottle. Well, the next surprise was that Dad one day found religion. It was about the time of Doreen's death, and when my dad found the Lord, there was certainly no going back. His Pentecostal church rocked his soul, and he was endlessly inviting me from that point forward to his full gospel businessmen's lunches and wanting me to come to church with him. And when I visited him after this conversion, his Playboys were gone, as well as his bottle of 5-Star whiskey. And Dad indeed seemed happy at that time because he found a community who not only supported him through Doreen's illness and death, and then his next wife, Charlotte, who also became quite ill, and supported him through her illness and her eventually death, and that's where he found his last wife, Helen in a church that he went to in Langley and Aldergrove. So he certainly got a big support from his community. So I grew up, meanwhile, with my mother, sister, and later my stepfather, Grant. I visited on the weekends, again, I say when I was home. And I received from Dad, as I had since I was a little kid, a schedule just before we took every trip. They named all the hotels or motels that never changed year to year. The towns always stayed the same, it's just the dates changed. And we would write him letters that he would receive on his trip. I had a whole collection of pennants he used to get from me from all the small little towns across Western Canada when I was a kid. So after I finished high school, I mentioned I started college. I mentioned I visited Dad a couple of times in the road. The first time was that trip to Winnipeg, where I got to understand the life that he had on the road. And then the second trip was a couple of years later. I got on my motorcycle and I drove off to Calgary to meet him at the Ambassador Motel. And then from there, or the Ambassador Inn, and from there I traveled up to, I guess through Red Deer, then up to Edmonton. And we probably, I think, got there on a Saturday. And on the Sunday morning, it's not surprising that he wanted me to go to church with him. And in fact, I had nothing really better to do, and I wanted to feel close to my dad, so I went to church with him that day. So we went into this large Pentecostal church. Kind of reminds me of the churches at that time I'd seen on television. And it was a real big show, a lot of excitement. There was loud music, a rock band on the stage, I think, lots of shouting and people speaking in tongues and people giving themselves over to the Holy Spirit. It was quite the theatrical event. Although I am kind of reluctant to admit it now, I was in a real chaotic environment, unlike the kind of calmer United Church life I live now, or environment I love now. It was in this environment that I think my true conversion to my faith began. I had attended, like everyone else, my previous church experience probably was as a young child going to the odd Anglican church on Sunday, as the whole community went to church back then, and I was actually baptized as an Anglican. So there I was in this Pentecostal church, and when in the middle of the service there was a call for people to give themselves to the Lord. And unexpectedly, surprising myself just as much as my father, I got up and I joined probably another half dozen people on the stage. I guess I wasn't a theater student back then, so I guess kind of the whole theatricality of the moment probably appealed to me. It's now kind of a bit of a blur, but I remember in the backstage after the conversion, a young teenage boy all excited for me and telling me all this stuff, and I just was in a stunned state and just I can't even remember what he said, but the memory that sticks with me now is just how incredibly happy my father was. And I think that afternoon or the following morning, my father presented me proudly with a King James version of the Bible. It's not the Bible that I generally read now, but the version that I read now, but it's certainly something I'm proud of, and it's something that my father truly gave me with his heart. So on Monday morning, I guess it was, I got on my motorcycle, kind of still stunned and not quite sure what had happened to me, and headed back to Vancouver. Now, not surprisingly, I guess, my Pentecostal conversion at that point did not really stick. I rationalized then, and still partly today, as a call to get closer to and to please my Father. The conservative Christianity that my dad's church still bothers me today, with their unyielding positions on things such as homosexuality, abortion, their literal interpretation of the Bible, the Second Coming, and their support of Donald Trump and other conservative points of view. Despite all this, a mustard seed had been planted. After I married Joan, and we were married then at Joan's family's United Church in Burnaby, Cliff Avenue, who at that point was a very conservative congregation, was probably one of the last United Church congregations to even consider gay ordination. And we eventually moved to Toronto, and it was in Toronto my now atheist wife wanted to go church hunting. Perhaps it was because we were thinking at that point of starting a family, and we found a welcoming church community at Belfair United Church in Toronto. Now, I know this feels like a long story, but my faith journey, like I suspect the journey of many of you, it was not a quick fix, and certainly it was not the quick fix that was expected at my Edmonton conversion. Perhaps I just saw more grays than they did, and not just black and white, and got to come to appreciate all the metaphors that I find in the Bible that give me some instruction. The pastors of Belfair that probably had the biggest impact on my faith journey, and they were the Reverend Dr. Bruce McLeod and his spouse, Reverend Joyce Kelly, who shared the ministry of Belfair. Bruce was a former moderator of the United Church and was very visible as a liberal voice of the United Church. Not only he supported ecumenicism when he was the moderator, but he was a weekly columnist in the Toronto Star and was one of the hosts of the United Church television back then. Bruce and Joyce were a dynamic team, teaching inclusion and preaching the inclusion that as Christians that we need to see God in everyone we meet. And Bruce, as he was as the moderator, was committed to not only bringing Christians together, but true ecumenicalism, but bringing people of other faiths together, including Jews and Muslims. And I was amazed at how many people at Belfair that were formerly Catholic or had been brought up in some more conservative traditions. I'm sure we were one of the first Affirm United Church congregations in Canada. I also remember a sermon where Bruce described Christianity as sort of one window to look out at, to view and to understand God, and that sermon sticks with me today. It was this spirit and the welcoming of that congregation that kind of drew me in and strengthened my faith. But there was also the music. There was an amazing choir, and after singing along with the congregation, a lady one day turned around and looked me in the eye and told me that I should be in the choir. I certainly did not need any more encouragement. I soon bought into the sentiment as to sing is to pray twice, as attributed to St. Augustine. Singing touched my soul as to the sense of friendship and community that I found at Belfair and continue to find today at Eagle Ridge United in Coquitlam. I have, like Bruce and Joyce before, been blessed primarily by not only the amazing ministry, but the other people within that were doing their ministry within these churches. The vision that David Anderson teaches us today to find our own ministry, and that's what the church should be doing for us. To understand that the follow of Jesus is not to be rewarded in an afterlife, but by joining an exclusive Christian club, but rather to take this ministry to the world to make the world now a better place, to find heaven in the here and now by following Jesus, the teachings of Jesus as a guide for us. My faith thus has been built within these church communities. My friendships within the choirs. My choir and faith mentor in Toronto was a gentleman named Harry Wolfram, who became kind of my surrogate Toronto father. Perry's would send Joan and I his family Christmas letter every year, and we continued to receive it after we moved back to Coquitlam in 1995, and got a letter every year until Harry passed away around 10 years ago. I celebrate Harry and the other faith builders in my life. My father, Harry, the men in my support groups and choirs, my current pastor and friend, David Anderson. I remember the men of our support group in Toronto called Break the Silence, that after the horror of the Montreal massacre, started to meet as a community within Toronto to not only to kind of discuss the issues of misogyny, but to form a friendship that to many became their pathway into the Christian faith. Pierce and I have also benefited from the scouting community, and I continue to benefit and strengthen my faith in the many choirs that I've had the joy to sing in, and with them experience of the heaven on earth. I hope this is my story, and I hope you find some message or comfort or get some value from it. Thank you for listening. God bless.